Children of hoarders, when did your parents go beyond the point of no return, and was there a reason they hoard? My grandmother was a hoarder, but only with food. She would buy in bulk and never throw anything away, even if it was past the expiration date. When we visited, we would very quietly throw some things away and not tell her. There was a jar of pickles in her fridge that was older than me. I'm 27. She did it because she grew up in extreme poverty and neglect. Her mother would just abandon her and her siblings for days, and they would be reduced to digging through trash to eat. When she grew up, she made sure that there would always be food available. This is a thing for children of the Depression. My grandmother was happy as a clam when she found out about big box stores like Costco. So much food, most of it inedible and way past due. I lived with my mom and grandmother who were both hoarders. The point of no return began when my grandmother got divorced and moved into a smaller house. That's when the "there's no room for anything" excuse became a thing. I think it's just because my grandmother loves shopping. It's her hobby. She will go to places like Kmart and Big Lots and look at their sale shelves for the best deals and get basically whatever is on the shelf. She forgets what she buys too. On multiple occasions she will buy me the same book twice. And for Christmas she literally gets me whole garbage bags worth of small dumb stuff that was on sale. Women's socks. She even apologized because there were more presents because she lost them. So, decades of losing things results in massive piles of forgotten crap. And she is afraid to just have me or some company go through it because her precious items may be in there. I have a diamond necklace somewhere in there. She hasn't seen that necklace in at least 20 years. I noticed my dad was over the edge when every cardboard box that entered the house was not allowed to leave because I can find a use for it, and we also at one point had 14 miniature schnauzers in a single-story suburban house because we don't have one in that color yet. The animal hoarding really gets to me. My mill had to have a chihuahua in every color. Never took the time to potty train any of them. Never really paid much attention to any of them, but she had one in every color. Those poor dogs. My mother was a hoarder. I don't know when it started. It was well established by the time I was born. She had been forced to give up 2 babies for adoption in her teens, with rumors unconfirmed that it was her older brother who impregnated her. After that, it always seemed that she spent the rest of her life trying to fill up the hole those 2 babies left in her heart. She had 6 more children of her own, plus adopted a 7th. Me. And then she raised several of her grandchildren after her kids were grown and gone. And then she just started collecting random homeless people and giving them a place to stay. Our house was a typical hoarder's house. Filthy and wall to wall with junk piled and stacked. It was a horrible embarrassment. And I wonder sometimes how I'd be different if I'd been raised in normal home. After we kids were grown, sometimes we would come in collectively and do a massive cleanup of the house. And I can still remember the look of sadness, grief, on my mom's face when she would sit and watch passively as we carried off all her piles of junk. And she would hide as much junk as she could to keep us from getting rid of it all. That's when I realized she had a weird dysfunctional attachment to this stuff that normal people don't feel. Prior to that I'd always just thought of her as lazy or maybe just horribly ignorant of how to organize things. Dated a girl with a hoarder mom. Their full-size basement, over 2,000 square feet, was always wall-to-wall with just stuff with just a little path to get to the washer and dryer. It didn't creep into the upstairs until the first son moved away. Girlfriend had 2 older brothers. Then the brother's room was filled with dollar store stuff and old clothes, etc. The other brother graduated and his room was filled with junk. Then the marriage started to fall apart and that's the state I saw it in. Then entry was floor to ceiling with boxes about a 2-foot wide path that took you to the living room or right to the bedrooms. The couch was clear with about 3 feet path in front of it. Racks of clothes, stacked boxes. Lots and lots of unopened dollar store toys. All her kids were older than 18 and no grandkids. The kitchen was stacked with piles of old newspaper. Only 2 open spots to eat at the kitchen table. Broke up with old girl just before she moved out, so I don't know how it ended. I'm guessing not well. Not my parent, but my grandmother. After her husband died, she started buying all kinds of things she didn't need. My parents live 8 hours away from her and her other daughter is sick, can't drive, so no one knew how bad it was getting. Now we knew she had those tendencies. We knew that she bought a lot of stuff and we knew she didn't clean very well, but we had no idea how bad it actually was. She had a stroke in January and she wanted to be in her own home. So my aunt, the one who can't take care of herself, moved in to try to help get her back on her feet. Predictably, this was a terrible idea. She lasted 6 weeks. During this time, I drove up to visit and was absolutely appalled. They were eating delivery every night because the kitchen was unusable. Just piles of crap that covered all the counter's stove. We later found out the stove didn't even work, and blocking you from even entering the kitchen. All over the house there was just trash and crap. And oh god, the mice. So many mice. I also saw the snake. I told my aunt at that time that she needed to get my grandmother help. Keep in mind that my aunt really couldn't even take care of herself, and she kept insisting they were fine. When I got back home, I called my mom and told her how bad it was. She was in the process of taking off from work when my aunt and grandmother had a terrible falling out. So my mom and dad went up there to take over. I drove up to help and we spent an entire weekend cleaning out 2 bedrooms. Yes, it took an entire weekend for 2 bedrooms. She had 35 Christmas stockings that still had the tags on them. I could go on about how horrible it was. If anyone's interested, this was actually really cathartic. I have a horribly morbid fascination with stories like this, so if it is cathartic for you to write out, I will be here as a focused and attentive audience for you. During my 20s, dad developed traits he hadn't exhibited before, including hoarding. He had an undiagnosed tumor in his right temporal lobe. That's an area of the brain responsible for high-level functions, motivation, prioritization. He literally did not know when he was finished reading the newspaper, so he kept years of newspapers stacked in his place. He was terrified of losing something important if anything got thrown away. What finally got him on track to proper treatment was a CT scan. Obviously, hoarding has many different causes. This cause is rare, but in case it helps anyone reading this thread, other symptoms included a deterioration in various organizing skills, and he gradually developed a short temper. The condition went undiagnosed until it impaired his spatial skills and his balance. This type of ailment usually gets diagnosed because of headaches or seizures, which aren't present in every instance. I think it was when my dad left, about 15 years into their marriage. I grew up in a messy house, but not hoarder level messy. I know my dad cleaned up a lot too. After my parents got divorced, my mom went off the rails, depressed, lashing out, and no cleaning. It was a while ago, so I was pretty young, but I think this is also when she started buying excessive amounts of stuff and never throwing anything out. I know she doesn't feel like her job has much value, so I think she derives a lot of satisfaction from buying gifts for people. She used to go through our trash at night and wake us up screaming if we had thrown anything out that could be useful again. As bad as it got after my dad left, my siblings and I still used to clean all the time, so it wasn't horrendous. We'd periodically clean out the fridge and clean rooms of the house. After we all moved out, it got really bad. Just piles of crap completely covering every surface. She still buys way too much crap and gets furious if we try to stop her. I receive boxes of crap all the time as gifts and I just donate it immediately. I don't even want to thank her for it for fear that she'll start buying even more crap as gifts. As a result, I've worked hard to be a pretty tidy person and throw stuff out on the regular. I freaking hated growing up that mess and I would never date a girl who was messy at all. Just don't want to risk raising kids in the same environment where I grew up. My mother owned 3 small businesses. During the financial crisis of 2008, the bank recalled the business loan. She refused to deal with the loss, and has now idealized that time in her life as the best thing that ever happened to her, even though it was awful for pretty much everyone because she mishandled her finances so badly and put the family in debt to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars. Anyway, imagine having the inventory of 3 Walgreens. Her businesses had nothing to do with drugstores, but they have a similar level of inventory moved into your home. All the hallways, the bedrooms, the living room, family room, dining, kitchen, etc. are now totally unusable. Boxes and loose mountains of product are stacked higher than your head. You can only sleep on half of your bed because the other half is covered in stuff. And to access the bed you have to climb up and over stacks of boxes. You live in constant fear that the family pets are going to dislodge something and be buried alive. You live in fear that you are going to be buried alive. That's what life was like for 7.5 years. No amount of therapy, or medication, or throwing things away. We once brought a dumpster to the house and got rid of an entire bedroom full of junk, but she replaced it within a few weeks, or serious talks had any change on her behavior. For unrelated reasons, my parents got divorced this year. A stipulation of the divorce was that she, and her stuff, had to vacate the home. Instead of hiring moving trucks, she was doing 2 or 3 trips daily with her minivan. My dad had to get a court order forcing her to remove the stuff, and the judge made my dad vacate the premises because my mom insisted that he was the problem. It took a fleet of U-Hauls and 24 hours going hard to remove all her stuff. She's happy with all of her stuff. She chose it over her family over and over again. It was always more important than us, more important than our safety and health. I wish that she loved me more than she loves a box of expired product that hasn't been opened since 2008. But she doesn't, and I've spent a lot of time in therapy dealing with that. I'm so sorry. That really is one of the emotionally hardest things about living with a hoarder. It's miserable dealing with the physical aspects, the filth, danger and waste, but the emotional aspect of coming in a distant second to useless crap is so much worse. Dated a girl whose parents were both established hoarders. In fact, they both already had separate homes and never lived together because each home was already packed with their respective stuff. That's starting out beyond the point of no return. Note, although we dated exclusively for 7 months, she never would invite me to her place, saying it's just a bunch of boxes. I have a feeling she had the hoarding thing going on as well. In my experience, children of hoarders either hold on to everything or hold on to nothing. My mom is a chronic hoarder and refuses to throw anything away and is constantly buying new stuff. Food, clothes, dishes, blankets, paintings, magazines. You name it, I bet I can dig through a pile at home and find it. She buys food from a discount market and everything else from thrift stores because she can't pass up such a good deal. She grew up on a farm where they didn't have it bad. Her dad made a lot of money, but he was such a hoarder too. When he died, we cleared out 3 sheds of pure junk from the farm. I may have had my point of no return yesterday, the 26th of December. I was at my parents' house cooking with my mom and she said, "Can you get me the milk from the fridge?" I opened the fridge and the first thing I see, front and center, is a big block of moldy cheese. I asked where the milk is and my mom said, "Oh, it's in the back." I lost it. If the first thing I see is moldy cheese, then by my logic, the milk at the back is going to be crap. I started grabbing open containers and throwing them at the trash. Tomato paste with a thick cap of mold, a Tupperware with greenish crab meat, a plastic container with dark green guacamole, anything I thought looked like it was spoiled. My mom freaked out and ran over to the garbage saying, "This is still good. This is still good," while picking things out of the trash. I just looked at her and dropped the container I had in my hand on the floor and walked over to the couch where I remained for the next 6 hours waiting for my ride to get there. I just couldn't stand it anymore. My father-in-law is a hoarder. I have to purge things at home to keep my wife from falling into this. For him, he sees value in everything. He won't part with anything. It is like cutting out his soul to clean out trash. He has 30-year-old catalogs from companies that don't exist. We have had to clean out his kitchen, bathrooms, and living areas annually. The big problem is he is a farmer with tons of space, barns, sheds, and a very large house. We are dreading the day he passes, not for the loss but the mess we will have to address before we liquidate his house. I have the opposite problem. My mom is a minimalist. She is also emotionally remote, and growing up, all love was conditional. I think she wanted the appearance of a perfect household and a perfect life. Any grade less than 90% was punished and bathrooms were cleaned twice a week. So she would go through the house and throw out anything that was out of place. Our house was sterile and cold. The only memories I have left of my childhood are a single photo album that she puts in the basement, and anything that I have managed to squirrel away. She has thrown away everything from my dad's childhood and has 3 pictures from hers. I go into a panic when I can't find anything because growing up it meant that she had snatched it. I find myself accumulating stuff now being an adult because I am comforted by things being around me. I can't be attacked when my back is against a hard surface. She gave me a copy of that awful life-saving magic of cleaning up for Christmas. Thanks, Mom. Thanks for offering a different perspective. I had never even considered there was an opposite childhood to mine, where treasured possessions were thrown out without a second thought. When I authorized her to buy things for my kids, she was taught by her alcoholic family that her value was in the stuff she could do for the family, and living 10 hours from me and the grandkids meant she couldn't do much apart from buying stuff. Last visit I found a museum to everything my son had ever remotely liked. Brief fan of cars, every car's car. Favorite color orange for a while, every orange object a kid uses. We cut my son off from new Lego kits because the pieces just mix in with the rest. Found hundreds of dollars in new Lego kits. Kid likes snow globes one Christmas. Found 15 beautiful snow globes. It made us scared to mention things, which meant she just bought more stuff that missed the mark because he'd moved past the phase. This sounds just like my mom growing up. I didn't realize there was anything weird about the way we lived. Stuff stacked everywhere. Now I'm grown and cannot handle going to visit because if my son likes anything, she buys so much of it. He mentioned he liked soccer and when we went for Thanksgiving, she had a huge basket of soccer themed stuff. It was just too much. My father has some hoarding issues. My father used to be a scrap metal dealer and would like to create things out of it in his spare time. The problem is that he didn't have spare time as he was running the business by himself. A few years ago he had to move from his place of business as his landlord was selling the property, and that's when I stepped in to help out clean up all the scrap. Who had a massive skip bin to load all the scrap into, and it was this moment I saw the hoarding in full swing. I was throwing scrap into the bin and he was grabbing it out saying that it was good metal and he could use it for something later on. Doesn't help that he also keeps countless receipts, written notes, stamps, old wrapping paper and a plethora of other useless crap stored in various rooms throughout his house. It's sad. I've tried to help. He acknowledges the issue saying that he's just fricked in the head but does nothing to solve the problem. Doesn't want to be seen as weak for admitting he has issues. It's going to be absolute heck for me when he dies as I'm an only child and I'll have to deal with all of it myself. I'm afraid my mother is going through this right now. She was born in a third world country and moved here when she was young, so I totally understand her mindset about keeping perfectly good things. I've been at college for 1.5 years and at that time the house has slowly gotten full of mostly clothes she buys at Goodwill, though there are still plenty of food and house decor relating things piling up. I often tell her that she should rent one of those large disposal bins that they take away after you fill it up, and she seems to be on board with it. She has never been married, and if she wants to find someone to spend her life with, she is going to need to self-reflect and assess her current situation. It was embarrassing growing up, not being able to invite friends over, but I think she is starting to realize the social and personal effects these habits are having on her. In a way, her habits have made me very conscious about my cleanliness at college. This has made me increasingly motivated to steer her gathering habits in a positive direction. We'll see. So many times depending on what you count. In my case it was more or less forced on the home by an abusive stepfather, although after a certain amount of time my mom probably deserves some blame too. 1. When they started renting storage rooms after filling the house and much of the yard. 2. When they kicked my at the time 12-year-old brother and I out of the house. Permanently BTW, because my brother refused to dig a perfectly good piece of pizza crust out of the garbage. 3. Now with my brother and I as adults they have crossed what is perhaps another point of no return in that they have filled up our old bedrooms with stuff so that if we want to come visit we, as broke college students, would have to get a hotel room. My mom is terminally ill and we barely get to see her. It is perfectly fine to refuse to visit hoarders. I would be honest and tell them why, and tell them they can come see me. I know it is painful. I'm so sorry you have to deal with that. I have no idea why my parents did not clean the house. I couldn't see the floor for years. Didn't have friends over because our large house was so dirty the couches were covered and I was embarrassed. My mother was married to a good man and had 3 kids, but he passed away from cancer. She met my dad and had me in her mid-40s. My dad was not a good man at all and she left him and moved back to an old coal mining town in the middle of nowhere. The house was very old, but sufficed. She was a terrible hoarder. Piles of stuff everywhere. The kitchen table and counters were always piled up. The entryway, the stairs, coffee and side tables. She held on to everything. As a child, this was my normal. When kids told me they weren't allowed to come over because my house was a pigsty, I didn't understand. We frequented thrift stores and she bought so much junk. We didn't have much money and, looking back, I don't even understand how she could afford all the junk. As I got older, if I tried to clean up, she would guilt me and say things like, but you used to love, insert something here. One time it was trolls, the other pogs, then would insist on keeping it. I could literally never throw anything away because she would keep it. I've struggled with hoarding my adult life. Never to her degree, though. My husband has OCD about cleaning, so you can see how we could be a disastrous match. However, he worked with me and I'm in a better place now. I'm not sure where I would be without him. Now, when we go visit my mom, it's hard. It's so clear to me the unhealthy impact of hoarding. She did better for a while and allowed us to help her clean up, but it went back to hoarding. She gets so worked up and will even cry if you try to throw the smallest things away. When we visit, I check the date on all foods because she has a hard time throwing it away. I attribute her hoarding to the relationship with my father. When we left in the middle of the night with nothing but the clothes on our backs and drove several states to get away from him. She often talked about how she lost literally everything she owned, and I feel like the hoarding was a coping mechanism. I could look past it for her because she's an adult and, despite everyone trying to help, clearly doesn't want to change. However, she has passed on her ways to my son. We lived with her for 2 years when he was very young, and working him out of it has been a challenge. He's doing better now and sees that hoarding is not good. Not my parents, but my grandmother is a hoarder. She saves bills from her parents, old doctor's prescriptions from the 80s, old TV guides that are in shreds, at least 12 totes of Christmas alone. If it's my stuff or my parents' stuff, it gets thrown out, but not hers. It sucks because before she had her strokes, she would take old moldy food I would throw out, and the next day I would see it on the counter eaten. My half-sister died of ovarian cancer at 25 from my dad's first marriage when I was 7. My mother had bonded with her very much and had always been a little bit of a hoarder, but once my sister died, it exploded full force. The basement became full. The garage couldn't have a car inside. I could never ever even think of having friends over. That would be such an embarrassment. I'm sorry that you missed out because of her. I feel bad for children of hoarders. Mum is a hoarder. I remember going to a friend's birthday party at her house when I was about 6 years old and wondering why there was no stuff in their living room, or where all my friends' toys were. My mum's house looks awful, and always has done, but if you move anything, or try and get rid of anything, my mum screams and shouts at you until you put it back. I once sold a toy pig that used to be mine, and she still hasn't got over it. She gets attached to things far too easily. After I went away to college was when things really got out of control. I'm the oldest of 5, and while my younger siblings didn't like living in a house with clothes on every surface and dirty dishes left everywhere and boxes lining the hallways, not to mention all the stains in the carpet from all our pets, they were more or less used to it, so they never really cleaned like I tried to. My mom has a lot of anxiety issues and a real phobia of throwing away things that might have sentimental value. Also, growing up with parents who grew up in the Great Depression instilled a real sense of utilizing every little scrap of everything. My dad would help me clean on the down low when my mom wasn't around to start panicking about what we might be getting rid of, but working full time to support a family of 7 meant that he didn't have a whole lot of spare time for that. In how it's affected me now, I'm very organized and minimalist. I clean if I'm feeling stressed, and even if things don't really need cleaning, and I'm not really sentimental about material things at all. When my mom treated every scrap from our lives like it was precious, nothing was. I fought with my mom for so long about how we lived until I finally realized that I was never going to be able to change her. I have control over how I run my own life, which is to be enough. I love her for all the wonderful things she is, not the things she struggles with. But if I ever make a whole lot of money, she's getting a cleaning crew. I've never written all this out before. Thanks for being here, Reddit. I was raised in Mexico. My mom had always said that her collection of assorted tools, construction equipment and materials was valuable and would get us out of hard times one of these days. One year, Hard times hit and she sold off her collection. I was proud of her for not hesitating to do so. I didn't notice until a little while later was that this had triggered a sort of binging and purging of stuff she collected. She had stopped collecting only tools and started collecting clothes, baby items, toys, electronics to sell giveaway. She got hooked up with a church pantry and started making baskets of donated food for her underprivileged friends. She sort of fixed her crazy and became a good person people looked to for help and admired. She passed away this July, so it doesn't matter anymore, but it's what people like her community, friends and family remember her by. The point of no return was when she realized she could help people doing what she loved. She went overboard shortly before her first binge when we realized her collection was the reason we had a scorpion and camel spider problem, where she proceeded to do nothing about it until we ran out of food and she had to sell it all. This is my favorite story. I like how someone with hoarder symptoms was able to fight it for the sake of her family and channel it into something beautiful and productive. Cool. I can actually contribute something legitimately for once. My father has been a hoarder for as long as I know, but probably got worse after my parents' separation or divorce. The biggest milestone would be when he purchased an out-of-business Lutheran church in a distant small town and began filling it with things. Our house always had a lot of stuff when we were growing up, but not to any sort of crazy level. My father collects antiques, not garbage. Thankfully, eventually he moved out, though, and I've never been to his apartment. I visited the church a few times growing up. We talked about all of the neat things he was going to do with it, like turn it into an amazing house or something. Then quite a few years passed and I hadn't been there. Went to see it and it was pretty depressing. The entire basement was filled with stuff, mostly broken, smelled horribly of mold and mildew. None of the plumbing worked. The church itself is filled with mostly broken furniture and boxes of little figurines and things. It's like a really dangerous, depressing maze. The saddest part of visiting is seeing my brothers and my toys strewn about. There are a lot of memories there. He now owns another church and another building. I think it's an old grocery store, which he's been filling. My grandmother's garage is full of his stuff. Last time I asked, he didn't know how many storage sheds he was renting, but it's probably like 8 or 10. He buys things from auctions, garage sales and flea markets and turns around and sells them at other flea markets and at a co-op antique store. Mostly, however, it's the one thing he enjoys in life, so he keeps hoarding, unapologetically. It's a bit cathartic to talk about this. I just saw him at Christmas and he is dying of cancer. It seems selfish to think about what is going to happen to all of his stuff once he is gone, but it's certainly on my mind. My mom was a hoarder. She did not hoard everything. She specialized in coats, ladies' suits and newspapers. She grew up during the Great Depression and World War II, when there was not much stuff to buy. Years later she discovered thrift stores would sell the clothes she wanted but could not afford when she was younger. So when I was a kid, she bought 1 or 2 used coats, outfits etc. each week. Many years later, my mom went into a nursing home and I cleaned up the attics and crawl spaces in her house. I counted over 400 coats and outfits, plus lots of shoes, sweaters etc. Most had the thrift store price tags on them. I estimated she spent about $12,000 on this obsession, money skimmed from the grocery and household budget that dad earned. These were 1970s dollars and worth about $45,000 today. Meanwhile her kids dressed in old, cheap used clothes. Dad drove an old car and we led a fairly austere existence. It makes me mad that mum wasted so much money on this obsession at the expense of her family. I'm so sorry. Father-in-law was a World War II concentration camp survivor, ethnic German and Russian camp from 44 to 49. He saw his father murdered in front of him, his mother and sisters raped, and his older brothers beaten almost to death at the age of 15, and all their possessions and home and farm stolen. He just collected anything of perceived value. Tools, pots, bits of wood. He did a lot of carpentry and repair work. It got really bad after his wife died. After he died it took over 15 huge dumpsters to clear out the junk, and we found the remains of a missing cat. His reaction was pretty understandable. I wouldn't say that my dad is deliberately a hoarder, but Marizo, he doesn't like spending time organizing. As a result, his desk is piled high with paperwork. He puts his laptop on a pull-out tray, and the garage looks like a hurricane went through it. His parents have a couple of large barns with plenty of space for everything. I think that he's used to having everything he may need available, but simply doesn't have the space to organize it with ease. One look at the garage, and you might think hoarder, but he doesn't collect things for the sake of it. Since the garage is out of sight, he doesn't center his attention on organizing it. Combined with my mom wanting a tidy house, a lot of stuff just gets stored in the garage, and it piles up. That said, I've picked up some similar tendencies along the lines of putting things down anywhere to organize them later. It's a struggle to get motivation to clean and organize. Having a small apartment doesn't help because I have no dedicated storage space. With less working space, you have to try harder to fit everything in, like a slide puzzle. Eventually that becomes a drag. I'm not really writing this as an excuse. I call the habit accidental hoarding. It's certainly a problem, and I wrestle with it regularly. I'm not sure how conscious my dad is of it. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.